Just going to thank you very much. I'm just going to start now and say that I welcome everyone to this, the second meeting of the Justice Subcommittee on Policing in 2014. Can I ask everyone to switch off mobile phones and other electronic devices completely, as they interfere with broadcasting, even when they're switched to silent. And that goes to the public area as well. No apologies have been received. While I'm on the public area, can I welcome in that area Mr Derek Penman, who's just gone into post as Manchester's Inspector of Constabulary. You've been in post 2 weeks. You've now been named and shamed. No doubt we'll see you in front of the Justice Committee at some point. Can I advise members and witnesses and everyone that unfortunately we need to conclude this meeting at 2 p.m. today, as business in the Chamber is starting early, and as you know, under parliamentary rules we can't meet at the same time as Parliament's in session. Item 1. I'm asking a committee to agree to take item 3 in private consideration of our next steps in relation to local policing. Are you agreeable? Agreed. Thank you. Item 2. ICT provision. This is our first item. It's an evidence session on the provision, and members will note we have received a response to our request for an update on the I6 programme, Airwave Communications Network and Handheld Data Services from DCC Neil Richardson. This response is included in paper 1 along with DCC Richardson's original response, because we are due to hear from him on the 6th of March. I'm not an expert in this, so others will be asking the questions, but I first of all want to welcome Chief Superintendent David. How often do we welcome you all here? I don't know. It's getting to be a habit. Well, soon of an anniversary. Chief Superintendent David O'Connor, President of the Association of Scottish Police Superintendents, same goes for Callum Steele, General Secretary of the Scottish Police Federation, and Stevie Diamond, Chair of Unison Police Staff Scotland. Welcome to you all. Can I go straight to questions from members? John.
Thank you, Convener. Afternoon, panel. At our last meeting, we discussed the I6 project, and I was certainly hoping that DCC Richardson would have been here to perhaps guide us through a letter I found very confusing, being a simple lad from the Gaeltacht. Now, unfortunately, in response to what I thought was a yes or no that we may have got back from Mr Richardson, we got the same management gibberish back. So, are you able to say, is the I6 project delayed or not? It's one of these closed questions.
I think that's a yes or no. That would be a good start. So,
I am able to say that I don't know.
You don't know? Yes, Mr O'Connor?
I would echo that. And I would expand further by saying, mainly because we're obviously not involved in leading the project and we don't have the detailed knowledge of the project.
I can add to that in that we, after the last meeting, we've engaged more often with I6 because it affects my members. The last meeting we had with I6 was just before December, and at that briefing we were told that I6 was on line to come in at the beginning of 2015.
See, when you get the kind of letter that we've got, you think, no, it's not. Because if it's yes, it is, you just get yes. But when you get huge paragraphs with, you know, this official speak John refers to quite rightly as wonderful expressions in here. I mean, I don't know what to pick on. Fully embracing the OGC gatework process and regular liaison, you think, aye, right. So, John, do you want to come in again?
Well, I don't know if I'm reassured by that at all. I'm reassured on one level, Mr Diamond, in as much as you'll recall that I raised with Mr House the engagement with the staff associations, trade unions. I'm delighted that's taken place. Hopefully that's taking place with the other staff associations too. I understood that the project was to be completed by October of this year, so again, that may be incorrect. If it's on track, do people know when it's scheduled to come into effect, please?
Again, I don't know the actual answer to that. I understand, and this is kind of project speak and project land, that we're in what they call a detailed design phase. Now, that's clearly an area where I assume that they've looked at what the user specifications are and they're working with Accenture to do this detailed analysis. I understood the implementation of I6 was to be done incrementally during 2015 and 2016. And as I say, we're at that detailed design phase, but those who are directly involved in the delivery of the project, I think, would be in the best position to answer these questions.
Indeed, and I pose them because, unfortunately, we hope to have DC Richardson first, and I asked the trade union and staff associations to comment on what he had said, but for reasons it hasn't worked out that way. Can you confirm the level of engagement then? Is this because the staff associations, do you consult with your frontline practitioners on what is going to get put in place?
Yes is the short answer to that, but in much the same way as I know the committee has given some fairly detailed consideration as to what in reality happens with consultation, the level of engagement and responses is not necessarily the same as you would ordinarily expect. I am also but a simple man from the Gaeltacht, and I tend to get lost in much of the computer terminology as well. But if I was to draw an analogy with the likes of building a house, my understanding is we're at the specification stage. We've had the architect's drawings which lay out the broad parameters in which the computer system is going to be delivered, and we're now looking at where the plugs are going to go, where the taps are going to go, where the toilets, the sinks, what kind of worktops are going to come in, and that's my understanding of where we are with that. And once we have some of that additional detail through the obligations that exist in legislation, not least this 1971 legislation for consultation with employees on major changes to the workplace, which I know Stevie deals with fairly regularly. Once we have that additional detail, then of course we'll be able to more fully communicate with the members exactly what it is that's before us. But at this moment in time, again, back to the house building, we're looking at a drawing, and that drawing is very difficult to get. Well, it's very difficult to engage in practical engagement with the wider membership because you've got to really see what's going to fit within it before you're able to get proper, meaningful answers back.
Well, just to confirm, the reason these questions are being raised is because they were raised directly with me in a suggestion, and I would have been very delighted to have heard a simple rebuttal. No, there is no issue, things are on schedule, rather than some of the phraseology. I'll leave it at that just now. Thank you.
And just, do people not use another one of these official expressions, milestones when they're doing these things, that this will be achieved by that date, this will be achieved by that date? I mean, surely somebody can tell us if they've been hit. These targets, these milestones as well have been hit. If you're just at specification, when was that supposed to have been done by, kind of thing? I mean, I'm not technological, but it seems to me you would have a date for something, the date for something else. Can anybody tell us those?
I think that comes, like Callum said earlier on, that comes down to the project, the people who are running the project, is to give you those milestones. Yeah, we're informed, as say, that the idea that this was going to be implemented, start being implemented from the beginning of 2015 in a phased thing. That's as much as we know, and we are told that there are different phases going through here. We know that our members have been engaged in some of these phases around the design, but we couldn't tell you exactly what the milestones are. I would expect as a project that there would be milestones all the way through that, but the project would be better advised to give you that information.
And I think timeline is important for the delivery of these projects. And in addition to milestones, we often hear about gateway reviews and checkpoint reviews, and that's all part of the governance arrangements, but I think those are probably questions for those that are directly involved with the project.
Right.
Convener, I may not be from the Gaeltacht, but I probably should say that I'm a simple Doric loon. However, I'm a simple Doric loon that's had my fingers burnt before in terms of ICT projects, and I'm always most interested to find out exactly where we're at. And I realise that you guys are probably not in the position to tell us where we are at in some regards. However, Callum gave the analogy of the house building scenario, and that the plans are now there in the main. Can I ask how involved have your members been in drawing up those plans? Because at the end of the day, it's your folks who are going to be dealing with a system. It's your folks who have the knowledge of what is required in terms of operational matters and what the system should be able to do. So how much engagement has there been at the very beginning about the spec of the I6 system? If we could maybe start with Callum.
Yes, certainly. I suppose a lot of this depends on what you consider to be the beginning to be, because the police service, for as long as I've been a member of it, has been looking at improving its approaches to IT. So in the absolute terms, I would say that this has been again, to use that horrible management expression, this has been a journey that has lasted some 21 years. So no wonder there was a sharp intake of breath. But my understanding in terms of the wider harmonisation agenda, that was something that was progressed fairly unsuccessfully under the guise of ACPOS in the past, where there was the ability to bring a lot of chief constables together in a room. They would agree furiously, then go back to their own forces and then say, I'm not doing it in mine, which was, by and large, a big part of the malaise that existed across Scotland.
Because you know, we're aware of all of the history in terms of ACPOS and all of the rest. And quite frankly, to be brutal, you know, the chief constables could have sat in a room and decided whatever. But at the end of the day, in terms of that operational delivery, it's your guys and girls on the ground who have a knowledge, more of a knowledge, I think, on what is actually needed and what systems will be put in place which will decrease their workloads rather than increase their workloads, because we've all come across ICT systems in the past which were supposed to lessen people's workloads, and you find out at the end of the day that their workload is much more increased in terms of bureaucracy. So I'm really interested in the point of how much engagement has there been with the frontline staff, whether that be police officers or support workers, about what this system should deliver. Has that engagement been significant, or do you think there hasn't been enough?
I think everybody would always admit that there could always be more engagement, but there will come a point in time where you've got to say that, you know, you've got to start, I suppose, putting some plans down on paper. And in absolute terms, almost all of the work on I6 to date has been undertaken by primarily members from the Scottish Police Federation engaged in the project and in the work stream. I mean, that's not to say that results in continual communication back between the project and the organisation and indeed the wider membership to let us know at a continuing rolling position where things happen to be. But we have the contentment and the knowledge that those that are involved in the work stream, those that are involved in making sure that the things that you just mentioned a few moments ago about making sure that there is a reduced work creation for those that are delivering the service, the people that are involved in that have taken considerable information and knowledge from those that deal with the very systems that they're looking at. So more significant than perhaps would ordinarily be understood to be the case is what I would say is the answer to the question.
David?
Yeah, just to expand on that, and I think, you know, the most important thing about IT development is to meet the user needs. All the way, and we tend to identify user needs, and then somewhere along the line, last year we've introduced Police Scotland, and sometimes processes change, and when processes change, that impacts upon user needs, and throughout the journey developing any type of corporate database or IT system, we've got to go back to make sure we're meeting what the user needs, and that's police officers and police staff out there who are delivering the services. And allied to that is the management processes and parts of that, and the management information that we actually need. I6 has got 6 parts of it, fairly substantial parts to it just now. We've got members actually working on I6 as well, and I've absolutely no doubt that they're bringing things to the table regularly which meet our members' needs, the Federation's needs and police staff needs. But my plea to the service and those involved in it is keep going back and making sure that what you're developing is what you're delivering.
Stevie? Yeah, and that count, my members have been involved in workshops, and I hate using the management speak again of workshops, but they have been involved in workshops. Okay, I'm happy with that. But they have been involved in workshops around each of the individual 6 areas of I6, and we hope that's going to continue. We've stressed that every time we've met with the managers of I6.
In terms of the Chief Constable, he, in response to questioning on the 27th of June by myself, talked about significant benefits that I6 can bring. And obviously, and I'm going to use management speak, I'm afraid, obviously we've had discussions previously about the gateway dates. Now, quite often when you reach a gateway date in these kind of projects, you find that there may not be the significant benefits that you first thought there would be. And beyond that, you often find that because there has been so much input from folks who are not going to be using it on a day-to-day basis, that so many bells and whistles are added to the system that are not necessarily required, which actually leads to problems in the future. Now, I've heard you saying that you're not aware of timelines, but have you got some assurance that your members will be involved just prior to and during that gateway stage to make sure that the significant benefits that we have been told will be built into the system will actually be there for your members, and that they will see that on a day-to-day basis that this is the right thing for them? Callum.
I can only say that I'm fairly convinced that those that are intimately involved in the project are almost certainly watching this broadcast from behind their computer screens just now. And even if they weren't considering engaging in that particular kind of activity, they almost certainly will be after today. And in any event, because I6 is so critical to an awful lot of what the police service or the success or failure, by and large, of what the police service is going to deliver in IT for years to come, we will absolutely be making sure that we will be asking questions as to how things are progressing at various different stages. Now, in truth,
Sorry, how can you ask that when you don't have timelines?
I was just going to get to that, Karina.
I wasn't going to let you go past that.
I was going to say, in truth, the signing of the contract for I6, I think many of us would probably consider, happened later than we were ordinarily hoping it would, for a variety of different reasons. The authority clearly wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be signing away its money on a vanity project, amongst other particular reasons. So after a period of time now coming up for the anniversary of the creation of the Police Service of Scotland, that would be an ideal and natural opportunity for us to be engaging with the I6 project and saying, give us a warts and all update on where we are at this particular moment in time. Now, because we are, well, I can't speak for David and Stevie, but I know that I am not intimately involved in it. And rather than get the full report, what we would tend to get would be an executive summary. We will wait for that executive summary to come, and then we'll be able to decide if we're in a critical situation or whether we're not. But all
hopefully in language that everyone can understand.
Well, that's often helpful.
We would like it as well.
That may not be the case, Convener.
Sorry, yes. You'd finished, had you?
Yeah, I think
yes.
so.
Do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely critical, and I6 in terms of the functionality, it will provide is pretty core parts of business: crime recording, crime reporting, missing persons custody, criminal justice. But it's not just about I6.
Words so that other people will understand them as well as me, and outside people will understand who may be interested in how their policing will be affected. After all, it's public money.
Yes, and I6 is core business. It's a corporate database we're developing, but it has to link into other developments in terms of command and control and our HR system and other developments as well. So, but this is central. As we go forward, we've seen a great deal of restructuring, reorganisation, but this is critical to reform in the police. This is key now. We're almost 1 year into Police Scotland, and we really need to take a critical look at the development of IT, because as that evolves, that's when we're going to see the real reform in policing terms.
Could you expand on real reform?
Yeah, well,
rather than just look at this as a technical system, but
looking
the
at
practical impact it would have.
Practical impact and looking at crime. Take crime as an example. Crime reporting, the way we record crime across Scotland, the different crime systems that are in place, legacy systems in place just now. Crime reporting, the way crime reports are sent to the Procurator Fiscal. Getting the consistency and the standards and the one solution to all of that in place in Scotland. And it's a fairly big ask, but that has to be the next step as we actually go forward.
There, because Mr Finney and I, in visiting Elgin, found that some folks were unhappy at this moment in time in terms of changes that have been made in terms of protocols at the ICT that they are using. The inability to print off certain things was something that was mentioned, but there were a number of other things. At this moment, with the transition, if you like, where there are all of these different systems still being used in the former 8 force areas, does that in itself cause great grief to your members, particularly when they have been so used to doing things in a certain way and there have been those protocol changes? And will I6, you think, alleviate that kind of difficulties?
It's fair to say that it causes primarily frustration more than grief, because one of the tremendous things about the police service is that we adapt, improvise and overcome, by and large, with most of what we've got.
Here, adapt, improvise and overcome.
What we have with I6 is we have a service now that is probably more than it's done in a long time in terms of IT, is looking forward to a solution to a problem that has dogged the police service for years, and that is the fact that there have been so many different computer systems, very few of which spoke to each other. There were various different approaches taken to try and make sure that they did. So I think with the knowledge of the potential for a solution on the horizon, the 2015 horizon, and for seeing the first elements of delivery on it, and the fact that they still have to deal with the old systems and the frustrations that are associated with that. And of course, you know, whenever you engage in any building project, again to go back to my housing analogy, when you put the spade in the ground, you might find that there are things in there that you couldn't possibly have foreseen. And I suspect that in some instances, the frustration is associated with putting the spade in the ground and unrevealing things that hadn't previously been considered in the overall project. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm just working through how things ordinarily work. That may well be an issue.
That's why you don't know this stuff. Why is, you know, I mean, I appreciate you're not at the front of dealing with this, but why you're not kept informed?
Well, so I mean, the one thing is that there are, I think there's about 15,000 different computers across Scotland. Many
Project and how it's getting on, and you just, you know, why are you not sort of up to speed in it all? I'm not blaming you. I'm just asking why.
I think that's one of the obviously I've got a different outlook as well, and not only for the efficiency of the service and making some of my members' lives easier with I6, but also that I6 is going to cost some of my members' jobs as well. And I think that that's why we've been reasonably better informed, and that we have these bi-monthly meetings now to keep us up to date with how things are going. And also, like you said, Mr. Stewart said, there are systems across the country that people are using that are disparate, and there's concerns about that as well. And what we're trying to do is try to have an overall look at how I6 is affecting everybody, about how different processes and things like that are working. So I think possibly from our perspective, because we've got that view about jobs in the background, that we are maybe better informed than colleagues who are more concerned maybe about the efficiencies of the organisation.
Plus the fact that many of your members will be dealing with ICT is the main part of their job, which frontline police will not be doing to the same extent. I'm just trying to get my head round in terms of the levels of engagement, whether there have been folks from the Federation, from the Association of Chief Superintendents and from Unison and police staff. How many folk do you think have been engaged with on a regular basis in terms of formulating the framework of what is required in terms of I6?
Certainly, there's been several of our members. We're not a big association, but we've had several members involved in the day-to-day development of I6. In terms of the staff association engagement, yeah, there has been engagement. Potentially could be more engagement, yes, and I think as we go forward into the next stages, whatever they look like, there has to be more engagement, there has to be more stakeholder engagement. We need to be able to drill down into the detail as we actually go forward. And I think, going back to your point about Elgin, communication is critical to this. Awareness is absolutely essential. And people need to understand exactly when these changes are being developed, what the implications actually are for them, not just in terms of staffing, but in terms of the way jobs are done, forms are produced, hopefully not printed, but because all of these things will bring about change, and change management is a core part of ICT development.
Sure.
Margaret.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I wonder, I mean, given the disparate nature of the software packages, the servers, the desktops, the airway tenements, not to mention the number of telecommunication contracts, do you think there could have been changes to the IC system that would have avoided the closure of the control rooms? Because it seems that the Scottish Police Authority considered 3 options, but really only one was put to the SPA board, and that seemed to be largely on the grounds of costs, and that was the closure one. But the option, for example, of the retention of existing sites with the rollout of the Storm Unity software, which would have allowed controllers to establish the location and capability of available officers outside their legacy boundaries, and also option 2, which involved the retention of all existing sites, but full integration through the introduction of a common suite of C3 ICT technology, commonly telephony, contact management, Storm Unity and airway systems. So in fact, could this local knowledge, that exists in Aberdeen, Stirling, Dumfries, Glenrothes, Pitt Street, could this have been saved, and could these closures have been avoided by ICT reform?
Before you do that, I just want you to put in the record what Storm Unity has been whispered in my ear, but I'm sure other people don't know.
Storm Unity, at present we've got command and control systems across Scotland. It's different ones. Storm is the one that's been used, and I think it's Strathclyde in the main, Lothian and Borders, and possibly Grampian. Yeah. Whenever the organisation was looking for a common platform, they chose Storm Unity, the updated version of the current system, as the method of choice, if you like. Absolutely got to agree with you. I think they went down the lines of centralisation of control rooms. They speak in one case of virtual contact centres, but that virtual contact centre is entirely based in the Central Belt. If you have a look at the Oxford Dictionary definition of virtual when it comes to computing, it's anywhere you can put a computing terminal, really. And I think that's the line that we've certainly been going along. We think there's been almost a need to dispense with people. It's certainly in the case of Dumfries, in our view, an obscene haste in trying to close Dumfries by the end of April, purely to save money, purely to save £675,000 in this year and £850,000 the following years. But there's absolutely no... in fact, just now there's a GNCC going at the moment where the first part of the consultation process around the C3 proposal has been put forward. That's purely about closing Dumfries. And no other options have been spoken about, like Mrs Mitchell said. It's purely about closing down Dumfries, Aberdeen, Stirling, a little bit of let's keep some functionality in Inverness, but in essence, there's the local knowledge and things that are being lost. We've barely touched the edges of a consultation on this, and the information that we've had so far hasn't been compelling to say that there was any great business case to say that that was the option that should have been taken. So it's a very difficult one to answer. In relation to I6, they're 2 entirely different systems, but like David O'Connor spoke about earlier on, these systems have to link, because an incident will create a crime, will create, as part of that whole chain. But they're two separate systems. But I have to agree with you. I don't think the organisation has looked closely enough at the other options that are available to keep the.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I suppose the answer to Ms Mitchell's question is probably yes and no. And I would say yes if you were to look at a start point that goes back several years. Because for many years, and not least the year since the financial crisis started to bite, the police service, police forces across the country could arguably be accused of underinvesting in IT in the main. Now, I think it's perhaps unfair to lay the expectation for the sins of the forefathers at the Steve House's door for what he inherited for Sir Stephen House's door, for what he inherited on the 1st of April, because the money just isn't there. And I'm sure that in some of the wider considerations that the Scottish Police Authority had, and they will speak for themselves in these kind of things, they will probably say that they've got to just deal with the situation that prevails at this particular moment in time. And you can't allow the continued underinvestment and propping up what are largely failing systems. You can't allow that to continue at the cost of the future success or otherwise of the IT provision across the police service. Now, in an ideal world, I think Ms Mitchell is almost certainly correct, with proper engagement at all levels from an appropriate time, and that time is not the 1st of April 2013 when the police budget is already under pressure, when all public services are under pressure, and there is a need to save, there is a de facto need to save money to deliver services. So I don't think that because of where we find ourselves, for as nice as it would have been with the benefit of hindsight, I put all these things in place, the reality is somewhat different.
Yeah, I have to say that in terms of C3, I see that we see this as an opportunity to improve and to modernise and look at the technology and integrate technology and improve capacity and capability and all that. The one thing that probably we think is that, in terms of C3 and police command and control, perhaps there should have been greater links with fire and rescue. And they seem to be looking at quite separately. But in terms of fire and rescue and policing, I think it's potentially a missed opportunity if all of this isn't actually looked together as we actually go forward.
Can I ask a separate question? It's been touched on before, the effects of implementing the provisions in the Criminal Justice Scotland Bill. Likely to add additional cost to Police Scotland's perhaps further delay of the new I6 programme? If so, is that a reasonable kind of comment to make in the first instance, and what would be the implications of any such delay?
I think the question in itself is perfectly fair, and the observation likewise. One of the key areas where the support of the use of technology is going to be important is the management it's largely going to be custody for dealing with the instances where people are going to be bailed to come back to police stations and for managing a rolling clock. It's physically possible to do that with pen and paper, and I dare say, as an all else fails scenario, if that's where we find ourselves as a service, that's what will happen. Although I think everybody recognises that will be incredibly labour intensive and far from ideal. So it absolutely has a key role in playing in making sure that that particular element of the criminal justice reforms are successful. But it actually goes beyond that as well in terms of what the Victim and Witnesses Bill was looking at. The creating of the one-stop shop centre for information to be provided for victims and witnesses. And indeed, going back to the question of success and how you measure the success, in that alone, the fact that there should be the ability to interrogate the one system rather than having to run around looking at several and the potential for missing something. That itself is a critical thing that that I6 will support when it comes into being. So I hope that helps.
I asked that very question, and I've been reassured that the changes to the criminal justice reform have been taken into consideration with the development of I6. As it always does.
Can I ask, because I'm not technological, and it's a stupid question, but so be it. Will the police system speak directly to the Crown Office system? Will they be totally compatible?
Yeah, I would hope that as we go forward in terms of crime reporting,
I meant also for the business of accelerating court business. For instance, when you're reporting something and the Crown Office is deciding whether or not there is either a sufficiency of evidence or corroboration to pursue a prosecution, and then that links into the Scottish Court Service, all these, the paper chases and the phone calls and the emails won't have to be, it'll just feed in, and it'll all be done electronically, and therefore save the public money and also bring prosecutions to court more quickly for both the sake of victims and the accused. So is it all going to talk to each other? Is what I want to know.
Well, the Current systems do, and if they currently do, and if there's any movement away from that, then it's a huge step in the wrong direction.
I6 is going to do that as
Yes.
well, definitely.
As I understand it.
Some, but not all.
Oh?
Yeah. I've been dealing recently with legal documents, the legal documents officers, which was, again, a proposal to do away with legal documents officers in Scotland and put that work back to wanted officers. And one of the things that we found from that was that that wasn't included in the I6 process. So that the delivering of citations, for example, was a manual system, or it was different systems across Scotland, but that's not part of I6 programme. You'd have thought that would have been a logical conclusion at the end of the criminal justice process, that, you know, yeah, it's not part of that
So
programme.
it wasn't a stupid question then? No, well, there you are. Well, can it be done now?
Again, we're down to the idea of what I6 was, and it's a very defined, this is what we're getting, this is what we've wanted, and this is what we're getting, and we're not going to add on to that so that we can deliver in time. That's the understanding that we have. So if there's any add-ons going to come in, they're going to come in much, much later.
You on the ground were being asked what you needed, and these are, I mean, quite often people say, well, if I was doing that, you've missed this out, you should have done that. Why not start from that by asking people what's needed and then say, here's the system we build to meet the practical requirements? Pardon? Sorry, John, what?
No, beg your pardon.
No, I mean, I just asked if you were saying that. Have you been saying that for a while?
To be honest, it only really came up when legal documents officers, the proposal came to do away with them, and I went out around the country to speak to legal documents officers to find out what they were doing was so disparate across the country, and that's when we found out that the system that was used across the country wasn't going to be compatible with I6. And in fact, Police Scotland were looking at bringing in their own system, an in-house system, to try to manage legal documents.
Convener, I sense...
Is it?
No, it's exactly on this, because this is a difficulty without having some of the technical folk here, because what Mr Diamond is describing is maybe something that I would have described as an additional bell and whistle.
Ah, right.
And, you know, it may well be that you add that on and you lose functionality in other areas. And this is a difficulty in us discussing all of this without having some kind of technical feed in here. Now, not that I trust that everything that they would necessarily say, because sometimes the computer geeks do everything they possibly can to confuse you in these issues. But, you know, this is one of the things about the difficulty in this line of questioning that we're having with you, gentlemen. The fact that it's not been communicated to you any reason why that hasn't happened bothers me, but there may well be reason.
I'm only looking at it from the point of view,
I'm
Kevin.
surmising.
I'm looking at it from the point of view from the full Justice Committee, how we're looking at the Victims and Witnesses Bill, the Criminal Justice Bill, courts reform, speeding up court cases, reform of the police. It seems to me if you're going to do all that, you make it electronically linked together so that you make things pass more smoothly through. Information to desks deal with it, the Crown decides whether or not to prosecute, goes to court comes out with things also electronic. You know, it just makes the whole process. Witnesses get informed because everybody knows, you know that a case is being adjourned because it's easy to communicate this. The police know where. I don't understand how, if you're doing this, a big thing like Police Scotland gets its system and then the court has another system. I don't know why.
The police service will speak for itself, but you know, I can only observe that this has been a very long-running project for the Police Service of Scotland. In fact, for the various forces and then inherited by the Police Service of Scotland, just to make sure that I'm absolutely clear. Much of the other stuff has come later. You know, whilst the criminal justice reform is now upon us, you know, I think it would be unfair to have expected the police service to be alert to that at a time that it was developing its computer systems, and indeed that there will undoubtedly be legislation that will come before the Parliament, probably in the next sitting of Parliament, that might well have an implication for police IT, which couldn't possibly have been considered when the thing was being drawn up. But on everything, there has to be a starting point. And I rather wish that in reality, my experience of police IT was that as projects developed, you got more bells and whistles added. Whereas in the past, what has tended to happen is that things got chalked off as costs used to run away, and much of the promised
Right.
benefits were not delivered. It must just have been the police service, but it was very rarely that things got added on. They tended to get taken off.
I'll move on, and I'll come back to that maybe when we come back to that with DC Richardson about this connectivity between the various systems. Graham?
Thanks for being here. Sorry, apologies for being late in arriving. Unless it's covered earlier, at the last meeting that we discussed the ICT with yourselves, I think it was Nevin Rinney who was here representing ASPS. I think the comments, to put it mildly, were pretty caustic and not supportive at all of the current arrangements for ICT across the environment of policing. I wonder, could you tell us, after that session, who approached the witnesses for meetings to discuss the comments that were made and to learn where the shortcomings were that supported the comments that were made by the Federation, ASPS and the union side of things? Did anybody bring you together in order to review what was said and learn the lessons?
I can't speak for Stevie, but I certainly know that I mean, it wasn't immediately afterwards, but it was pretty close to after the last session, where we met with the head of the I6 project and had some discussions regarding. I mean, in fairness, most of the discussions we had were about consultation, because that was a fairly heavy feature of the last evidence session as well, and most of our conversations were about that. I think it's also fair to say that in truth we weren't telling the Justice Committee things that the I6 project didn't already know. So whilst we were critical of the systems that existed at this moment in time, and I'm sure Chief Superintendent Alec Kipman would be able to speak for himself on this, he would say that the I6 project was already working towards solving these issues that we were highlighting. And I think what we were trying to, certainly what I was trying to do, was give an indication as to why I6 was so important to the police service. You know, I don't think that was necessarily caused the I6 project any difficulty in the manner in which we expressed our frustrations.
Can I say just before we go on that the evidence, as I understood it from, if I can describe it as the official side, the management side of projects and the current systems, painted an entirely different picture of ICT delivery in the 8 forces moving into the single force. That's why I wondered, surely there should have been something of an emergency meeting after the last evidence to find out where the gap was in the appreciation of what was being delivered.
From our point of view, we shortly after that meeting, we had a meeting with DCC Richardson, and thereafter a meeting with Chief Superintendent Hitman, and our engagement, you weren't here earlier on, but our engagement is continuing a bi-monthly basis around I6, but it's not just about I6. The first we knew about Storm Unity, for example, was when it was brought up at the SPA meeting, when they were proposing the closure of the control rooms. And there are other electronic systems that we're not being involved in. And one of the big issues that we have is, if you have us early engagement with that, we can understand where things fit into the whole big picture, and that's not happening.
Yeah, similar to my colleagues, we've also met with DCC Richardson and Chief Superintendent Hitman, and as we roll forward, there has to be more engagement, and a big part of this is managing expectations within the service for ICT development. And I think it's important that the right information is put out at the right time to make sure people are aware of it, because there are huge expectations in terms of ICT delivery, and we just have to be honest with people.
In June last year, it was indicated to this committee it was too early to comment definitely on delivery, and there was also comment about the sooner we get on with it, the better, and so forth. We're now in a different year. Summer's just round the corner, one hopes. I've got to say it is somewhat depressing to still be in a situation where there is no firm picture ahead of us about where we're going with this ICT delivery and where the timetable lies.
Oh, we've been on timetable.
Indeed, I heard that. Do you feel from your side of things that you can press the right buttons in order to ensure that this timetable is shared with us?
I think the short answer to that is having a belief that almost everybody involved in this project is watching this session. When we go back and we ask the questions, we probably might get more the very specific thing that you're asking about, the timetable. I can only observe from some of the things that have happened in the past that my guess is that this is still in some of the contract stage and the discussions that are taking place, and that there is often enormous sensitivities about sharing things when these contract discussions are still ongoing, and it may well be that that would be one of the obstacles that we would hit, but that's not to say that it shouldn't be possible for us to try and get at least better indications than we have just now.
I don't, unless there's something that you'd want to add to it, I don't want to go further with that. In that context then, that we have waited a very significant length of time before we enter a timetable period, it's been acknowledged at previous sessions that the key to the next ICT delivery will be a fundamental change in the way business is done by policing. Now, there has been some comment about changing forms and how one accesses forms and so forth, which in my terms seems a bit penny ante. Is there actually discussions going on within the service about where these fundamental changes will take place and what that new way of delivering means? And can you share any of that with us?
Certainly something that's uppermost in our thoughts, and you're absolutely right. Change the way that services are potentially delivered. Almost certainly there'll be training needs right across Scotland for every member of police staff and police officer. That has to be part of the actual project development at the delivery stage, but I'm not cited on the full detail and the actual training needs for the new I6 project.
Without being difficult, one couldn't identify the training needs until you know what the changes are going to be. Is there any sign that that plan is around the corner and that we know what these fundamental changes will be?
And that's something
if the answer is no, then...
yeah, well, yeah. We're not cited on it.
If I may, Convener, policing is always going to be a people-hungry profession. It's going to result in engagement with the public on a face-to-face basis, almost as the default position. Where I believe most of the fundamental changes will come is in terms of what we're able to do when we get away from dealing with the members of the public and are dealing with process back in our police vehicles, on our terminals as we're on the going between incidents or have some downtime, or even when we're back in the offices. And I believe the fundamental changes will largely be in that we don't have multiple entry. That doesn't sound very fundamental in truth, but for the police service that is enormously fundamental.
Comprehensive sense, do you have a picture? I mean, I think that David's been kind enough to indicate that that picture isn't aware to him. Have you sat down somewhere and looked at the future, been overwhelmed by the nature of that change and thought this is going to be exciting? Or are you still waiting for that day?
I think you know me well enough, Mr Pearson, to know that I'm not easily overwhelmed. But
I'm disappointed at that, I've got to say. That's what the service is supposed to be about, being overwhelmed with the excitement of the future.
Oh, I'm often excited. That's a difference between being overwhelmed. The project team, certainly Chief Superintendent Hipman, did come to the Joint Central Committee in advance of the contract being signed. He talked us through some of the expected functionality, usual schematics and nice diagrams on screens and so on and so forth. And largely, the expectation is that most of it is going to be fairly intuitive. It shouldn't require phenomenal amounts of training, because most of the service is now computer literate to a degree, and that most of the, certainly large proportions of the elements of day-to-day functionality will be readily understood and easy to deliver. But in terms of being overwhelmed, I certainly wasn't that.
I'm going to stop. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop there, because if you want to go on to the next item on the agenda, you've only got 9 minutes. So if we've achieved one thing today, it is to try and get a timetable, whatever we call them, or milestones or whatever, about the development of IC6. And we've got DC Richardson coming March the 6th So we've got that down now, at least. Can I thank you very much for your evidence? Sorry, it's as usual truncated. Thank you indeed.
Thank you. Convener, given that it's likely that, as our witnesses have said, that people will be maintaining an interest, can we not wait till there? Can we have something, a simple response from DCC Richardson? Is this project on time or not? And if you can avoid using much of the phrase here,
Bear with me a minute. Yes. We could ask it again. We can say for a second time, and in language the convener.
And for the avoidance of a doubt, we don't need the repetition of the.
No.
And
yes or no.
Twice.
Yes or no, or perhaps something anyway. Thank you very much. Thank you. Also, what it means.